Hello, everyone. This is John Krause. I'm the Director, External Affairs at RICS, and I really would like to welcome you all today to our World Built Environment Forum webinar series. And today's session is going to be all about blockchain and how it's affecting the real estate investment landscape and its impact on transactions in real estate. As the audience, you are all very welcome to submit questions via the question box, which you should be able to see on your screen. And we will try and answer as many of those questions as we can. But we're going to start off with some discussion. And first of all, I'm going to invite our three speakers to introduce themselves. So starting with you, Dan Hughes.
Hello, thank you very much. It's great to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. So my name is Dan Hughes, and I've spent my career working within the property sector, specifically looking at data and technology. And earlier this year, started up Liquid Real Estate Innovation. And we work with companies at a market level to look at future trends in real estate and then help develop products and strategies to meet them. And I think blockchain is one of those things that is often talked about. It comes up an awful lot at various different meetings, conferences, and discussion points. So I'm really looking forward to getting into the impact of it might have on the real estate sector.
Thank you, Dan. And Linda Chandler.
Thanks, John. Hi, everybody. My name's Linda Chandler, and so I'm the CTO and co-founder, along with Dan, at Liquid Real Estate Innovation. I've had 25 years in the tech sector. I specialise in smart cities, and that's how I came to the real estate and built environment agenda through smart buildings. And blockchain, again, is one of those technologies. I've seen a lot of technologies come and go in 25 years. So it's, again, a fascinating topic, and great to be talking about it today.
Thank you, Linda. And Joe Bronkers, who's joining us from the Netherlands today.
Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon, Joe Bronkers. My background is real estate. I'm not an IT specialist. I've been working for more than 20 years in the beginning at institutional real estate investors here in the Netherlands. And the last years I've been working for a real estate investment bank, FGH Bank, which is a subsidiary of Rabobank. In the last years, I think since 2014, I've been investigating what blockchain is, how it can be applied, and when I understood that, I thought this is a technology that can have huge impact in real estate processes, and we're going to talk about that today. Maybe to add, last year I started with blockchain to real estate, and last summer, we started with the Foundation of International Blockchain and Real Estate Expertise. This is a non-profit organization that wants to connect real estate professionals that want to understand what is blockchain and how can it be applied in real estate, to connect them with IT and blockchain developers and professionals who do not know what exactly are real estate processes. And by mutually exchange information, exchange their questions, solve issues that come ahead, we can let grow the understanding of blockchain and lower the barrier for adopting this new technology. Hello?
Thank you, Joe. And while you were speaking, I advanced the slides there to reveal one that I think you're responsible for. And the question I think that many people will ask is just what is blockchain? And we have a slide up there. Can you, in a sort of pithy and non-technical way, Joe, tell us how you would define blockchain?
Yeah, I'm going to try it, but it's rather difficult. One time somebody asked me, can you explain me in one sentence what is blockchain? And maybe this is good to start with. I think blockchain is a technology that can replace a middleman, a trusted middleman that we use in many processes. How is it working? If you're looking, blockchain, it comes from a distributed ledger corner. So we all know the situation in which we use spreadsheets. In the past, spreadsheets were probably the easiest way of sharing information. And then we came into a situation that you have distributed ledgers. The most renowned example of that for me is Wikipedia. Everybody knows that you can submit information and to the world, and the world can read the information from the Wikipedia ledger. There's one big difficulty, one big issue, namely that it is difficult to trust all the information. And so in sharing information and adding trust to the information, that is what blockchain can do. If you look to this slide, there are two main things that make blockchain so special. The first one is the hash algorithm. How does the hash algorithm work? If you see in the left, you see that there's a message, a document, or maybe it is an Excel file. It is some information file. By running a hash algorithm, you transform this file, it doesn't matter what size it has, into a hash value. And you see that there's a code with small letters, capital letters, some numbers, something nobody can read and nobody can hold. But it is possible. This is a one-way algorithm, so you can transform all information on the left side to a hash on the right side. And if you needed to store the information on the left side, this will take a lot of capacity of the MBs, the number of MBs that you need to store the information will take a large amount. By only having a hash, it's only a few bits. So it is possible to take a fingerprint that only takes a few bits of storage capacity when you want to store it. If you have a hash, you cannot run it the other side, back to the information. So there's a one-way algorithm. This means that if you are going to send information to somebody else, for example, the Excel file that you run through the hash file, you send a copy of the existing file, but the one who receives it, he can run the same algorithm. And by running the same algorithm, he gets exactly the same hash value. And by seeing that he has the same hash value, he can trust that he's seeing exactly the same document, the same file. If in the original file I change a comma or a space or whatever, the outcome of the hash algorithm will be something completely different. So in the situation that we are going to share information, in the present situation, we ask people as middlemen to check if this is the information that we can trust. And they put a stamp, they put a signature on the document, and then you know, okay, it's checked, we can use it. But now by sharing this in a digital way, using these hash values, we have the proof that we are talking about the same document by using such a hash function. I think this is one of the major components of blockchain. The second one is the red clock on the right. It's just timestamping. By knowing at which moment we had which information, we can build a historical track of the information. And then putting these together, we can create a chain of blocks with information. And in the chain, every new block has a pointer towards its previous block, also with a hash. We're using many hashes. And every moment we add a new block of information to the existing chain, the chain grows. And the green block in the beginning, this will grow with the black box towards the right side. And by always looking to the longest track, we know that this is the track that everybody is having consent about. If somebody wants to make adjustment into a previous document that is filed, for example, the first ping block, we can try to change the information. But then we see by having these hash tracks, we see that the line of blocks, that it is broken and that it's not anymore the one that we had from starting from the green one. And we know then on that moment that there's something wrong with the information. And that is what blockchain does. It is a track of blocks. Yes, sorry.
Thank you, Joe. That sounds like a very full exposition. I wonder, does that kind of description, Dan, is that your recognition of what you would say blockchain is all about?
Yeah, I think that was it's a good explanation. I think it's worth maybe taking just a step back and looking at it in very, very simplistic terms and explaining what some of the words mean. So blockchain is a distributed ledger, and distributed ledger means two things. One, it's a ledger, and a ledger is a list of things, normally transactions. So it's a record of things that have happened. That could be about how much you've loaned to someone, or it could be about who owns a property. And distributed simply means that it's not on one single computer. So it's on a number of different computers. And actually that's a large part of the strength of blockchain, is it's on lots of different computers at the same time. So it's a list of things that's on lots of computers, which is translated as distributed ledger. And as Joe said, every record that's created, every piece of paper that writes down a transaction, the clever bit is it includes a small part of the previous one. So you end up having a chain of different transactions that it's very, very difficult to break. Each one of those transactions is called a block. So you end up having a chain of blocks, or in this term, blockchain. So there's a really, really simple technology. It's very clever behind the scenes how it works, but it's effectively a list of transactions that does two things. I don't really believe that people in the property sector on the whole need to know the ins and outs of how blockchain works. But there are two things that do really need to be known about because they have massive impacts on the overall sector, which hopefully we'll go on and talk about. The first thing and the biggest thing is it's about getting rid of authority. So if you look at most examples, such as at a bank, you have a central bank who will manage the money for you. You trust them. If you have a land registry, they will record the transactions. You trust them. By doing away with the central authority, you can put it on several different computers at the same time, so you can have distributed trust. So in any situation where you need to have a single trusted body to make it work, that's not necessarily true going forward. The other thing is that this is a permanent record of transactions that have happened. So there's often a lot of confusion between what's a database and what's a ledger. A ledger can no longer be changed after it's been created. So it is an ongoing, growing list of transactions that happen, unlike a database, which can be updated and changed and things can be deleted. So once there is a record on the blockchain of a transaction, that is there forever. And the only way you can change that is by changing over half of all the other computers. And that becomes practically impossible. So for me, blockchain is a very, very clever technology. It's going to have a huge impact, but it's just about doing away with central trust in the situation where you record transactions.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you, both of you. So it's kind of, you can contribute it in a way that you could maybe do with Wikipedia, but how do you trust that? With blockchain, you can trust the source. Is the source the authority, if you like, is distributed. It's no longer a single central authority, and you've got a full transaction history. I think that's a really interesting and clear description of how blockchain works and what it's about. And I think a question a lot of people will have is what is the difference between blockchain and Bitcoin? Because I think, for a lot of us, it's just the same thing, isn't it? Linda, what is the difference?
Well, really, this goes back to the origins of blockchain, I guess. So if we go back to kind of 2018, and Bitcoin was really the first kind of use case, if you like, of blockchain. So blockchain is the underlying framework of how you execute these transactions. And Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency that's built on that using the framework. So it really was the first use case. And actually in 2013, a company called Ethereum actually kind of started to build out that framework. And therefore people could start to build other applications on top of blockchain that weren't necessarily just about cryptocurrency. So they started to introduce concepts such as smart contracts and way of enforcing agreements on the blockchain without human intervention. So again, just see Bitcoin as a use case of blockchain, but actually blockchain is the abstracted and generic form.
Exactly. I think you have three main modalities in blockchain, and Bitcoin is, like you say, Linda, is one of the most renowned uses. What makes Bitcoin special is that they solve a double spending problem. So if you can represent a real asset by a digital asset, that is what Bitcoin does. Bitcoin says, okay, real money will be represented as a digital money now. And they added something to the thing we explained in the previous slide. They added something that if you own a Bitcoin, you can submit it to somebody else, and the double spending problem will be solved. So by sending it to the other person, it will be removed at your side. So if I have a wallet with 10 Bitcoin, I send one to Linda, for example. The consensus mechanism, the network of computers that calculate if I can do this transaction, they say, okay, if you want to submit one to Linda, you have 10, we'll have to lower your amount to 9, and we add one to Linda, and this is done automatically with Bitcoin. And then the track of this will be stored on a blockchain like we've seen before. And then if you add smart contracts, it's not necessary anymore to have human people starting the transaction or receiving the transaction. You can build it with code, with a software code. But if an event occurs, we can measure that, and this can trigger the transaction. So we can run into autonomous transactions, and we can have the track of what happened afterwards.
Okay, so we've got a difference there between what blockchain is all about and what Bitcoin is all about. The two are clearly very closely related. What, is this really going to make a change the real estate industry? People talk about disruption from blockchain. Is that just, lazy thinking, or is it really going to make some tangible difference that we're going to see and feel? Dan, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. So I think that it's fair to say that in the last, technology in real estate generally has been around for many, many years. But as it's getting quicker and more powerful, the costs are coming down, there's more and more data, and people are starting to look at buildings to perform in a very different way. There's no question that technology is having an increasing influence and is going to have a significantly increasing influence in the sector over time. Part of that is going to be how do we use the technology and how do we understand the trust issues, how do we share data, and there's no question that amongst several technologies, blockchain has a role to play, in my opinion, in understanding some of those things. For me, it's about the trust issue. Having that distributed over a number of different companies, computers, means that you can do away with having to have a single trusted body. So, for example, Joe said about smart contracts, or whether that's land registry in developing countries. There are numerous different examples where having a really good, structurally trusted single body is a problem at the moment and might be able to be done away in the future. So for me, it's going to absolutely have an impact, but it's probably going to be much behind the scenes. It's going to be a technology that's used amongst a number of different technology solutions to deliver things to the real estate sector.
So perhaps not something that everybody really needs to understand deeply, but need to understand perhaps the impact and the value of it. And you started, Dan, to touch on what the added value is. Linda and Joe, do you see other added value opportunities for blockchain?
Well, I think that the most important is that in the future we will come into a more transparent real estate environment, so it brings transparency. I think by having more trusted data, we can speed up transactions, so the liquidity will increase. And like Dan already mentioned, I think by having less involvement of middlemen, for some people it will reduce the costs, but for others, it will reduce the incomes. So it will also have impact on the business models. And I think that's the main thing I want to say. I think we have to think about blockchain more in a strategic way. It will not change the world in a few days or in a short period, but it will come the same like internet came. In the beginning, we didn't know exactly what internet was going to do. But over the last decades, we've seen how dramatic the impact of internet has been to every industry. And I think blockchain is having the same potential. So I would like to see it as an infrastructure component of which we have to get more familiar with, to understand what it can do, and to apply it more and more. And we have to learn it step by step. And this will take several years.
Thank you, Joe. And so I wonder, Linda, in terms of making this very real to people, what if you could name one or two really big, clear, tangible uses of blockchain that make this feel very real to our listeners, where do you see the real uses coming in?
So I might take a slightly different stance on this actually, because I think there is quite a lot of skepticism around blockchain actually in terms of some of the sentiment. I don't know whether Joe would be in a better position to argue the real use cases, and I might be in a better position to answer the counter argument to that.
Mm-hmm.
By all means.
Yeah, okay, no problem. I think one of the earliest that we've seen is the land title registry, and you see it in countries, third world countries, where there's no system that they see a huge benefit. But also in the Western world where we live in, for example, Sweden, I've seen in Sweden how they approach the project, and it's not that they want to change the way we do transactions, but they want to change the approach of doing a transaction, the way how we collect the information, and that everybody who is involved can trust the information that is needed and that it is there, and what is the status for the people that have to bring the information together. So what you see in Sweden is that everybody is seeing in the same central ledger what is the status of the information. They do not have anymore to wait until all the information is complete. And this, I do not exactly know the numbers, but it reduced the time of doing a transaction by many tens of percents. So there's a big impact on the time of doing a real estate settlement transaction at the land title registry in Sweden. I think this one is one of the earliest examples. Another one, which we see probably the most in the world, is the tokenization. By having fractional ownership in real estate via tokens, you can trade tokens. So somebody can, in the real world now, it is administrative burden, and there's a certain minimum level to step into a real estate investment. But by using tokens, the administrative burden can be automated almost entirely. So even if I'm a student and if I have only 10 euros to spend, or 10 pounds or whatever you like, you can step in and administering this and paying a direct or indirect return will not be more intensive than doing this for participation of 1 million. It's the same work, it is fully automated. But there are also a lot of questions by doing this. It's about who owns which token. It's about the KYC questions. We have the privacy regulations that change, and that we have to apply to all this. So by having these possibilities, we also have new challenges to solve. But I think those two are the most early ones that we see in the world now.
So let me bring Linda back in. Linda, you said you wanted to expand on perhaps a contribute to what Joe is telling.
Yeah, I guess, as I said, in 25 years in tech, you see a lot of technologies come and go, and I do think that blockchain shows great promise, but there are very polar opinions on blockchain, and not just for the real estate industry. And I think there's one camp of people that thinks it's going to solve everything, and there's the other that thinks it's a solution looking for a problem. And I think the truth is probably somewhere in between. The analyst Gartner actually talks about a hype cycle of technologies, and it goes through kind of the various maturity stages of a technology. And at the moment, they're actually saying that blockchain technology and related technologies is in what they call the trough of disillusionment, which means really that the interest in the technology is perhaps waning a little bit as experiments and implementations are failing to deliver. And I think there are some successes, but when you actually come back to actually what is the problem that we're trying to solve? And actually Joe alluded to it, the fact that, this isn't just about the technology, this is about business processes, it's about business models, it's about technology and economics and politics actually kind of all coming together. So it's much bigger, the questions around it are much bigger than just coming down to a kind of pure technology solution.
Exactly. If I speak to real estate companies, most of them, they say, okay, we look into it in a system of 3 horizons. You have the first horizon, that's keeping the existing business running. So we have to do innovations to keep it on track and to be competitive in the market. We have to, this takes, I think, 75% of the attention of the company. Then they have a second horizon. And second horizon is, what are the new products? Where can we experiment so that we know what we must implement tomorrow so that we can stay on track again. And this will have, let's say, 15% of the impact of all the efforts that the company does. And then there's a third horizon, and these are the new technologies that will be there within 3 to 5 years. And it's more imagination. Try to understand what are the main technologies that we're going to see in the future and try to determine how they can impact your business. And I think for 70, 80% or probably more of the real estate companies, blockchain is somewhere far away on the third horizon. They've heard about it, they hear it coming back every time. So they understand, okay, this is going to be important. We have to try and to find out what it can mean for us. There's maybe a few real estate companies that said, okay, we have studied that, we wanted to do experiments, and they're already starting to examine the second horizon. And by doing experiments and by trying it out, there will arise many more questions. And I think this is what Linda said. We've heard about it, but we do not see yet the problem that can be solved. Every time that we try to use it, there will be many more questions that arise. And by doing the experiments, we can get the answers. So I think blockchain will be there. It will not be there tomorrow, but it will be there in the future. And the impact will be possibly huge, but we have to find it out. And I think that's why real estate people should open up and try to find the answers. First put the questions and then try together with the blockchain people, try to find the answers. And then we get more familiar, and I think this will make it able to adopt blockchain technology and benefit from the things that it's going to bring us.
Yeah,
okay.
and I agree, Joe. I mean, when you go to the trough of disillusionment, there always is the plateau of productivity that comes out at the other end. And as you say, that's probably kind of in the 5 to 10 year horizon.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a great risk now. People that try to sell you a blockchain solution, there's a great risk. We say they try to sell you a Christmas tree while you are looking for a palm tree, but you cannot understand it. You don't know how to determine it.
Okay, so there's a series of time horizons there, some longer than others. We're seeing some experimentation. We're seeing some skepticism, also some people wondering just how are we going to use it. I wonder if I can turn back to Dan and say, are you seeing particular regions in the world grasping the opportunities and experimenting, or is this something which is very much part of particular individual markets?
So I think so I'll start off by answering part of the last question, which is I think that it's very rare that a single technology solves major problems. in any situation, really. And so the really most important thing for the property sector is to focus on what we do as a property sector. So we are all about building offices that help people to be productive, or we're all about building houses for people to live in, or whatever that might be. Technology and all sorts of technology, all of the buzzwords around, could, will, or might have an impact on those. And I think blockchain is going to be an important part of that. But for me, it's down to the technology companies and the technology people to make sure that it's put into a packaged, understood and consumable format that then really solves problems. And the real estate sector really needs to make sure that it's open and focusing on those problems, because we can then make sure that we're aligned and solving them. And from a regional point of view, there's an awful lot of investment going into technology, including blockchain around the world. If you look at some of the organisations like the International Blockchain Real Estate Association, or IBREA, then they have meetups all over the place. I think that there's more, from what I've seen at least, there's more of a focus on that tends to be on the Northern America and Europe side of things. But I think there's blockchain examples all over the world. And the geography of technology is very different from the geography of real estate. So one thing that's done in one country can sometimes be very, very easily translated across the world almost instantly at very low cost, which is not true for real estate. That said, if it's about how a real estate market itself works, because it's often very local, technology isn't always as translatable, because it depends on the use that it's coming up with. So from my point of view, it's being used across the world. There's an awful lot of talk about it. I think the most important thing is to focus on what we're trying to do as a real estate sector, and then use blockchain where it's needed, where it brings benefits, which will normally be in combination with lots of other technologies.
Thank you, Dan. And while you're speaking, I've flicked through some of the slides there, because I think many of the questions that we had prepared, we've started to cover in the conversation. And we've got a slide up at the moment which is really trying to summarize the impact the blockchain transactions, talking about more transparency, speed and liquidity that was mentioned, standardization, intermediation, all of these things. And I think really then that takes to, I guess, a bottom line question, which is, ultimately, what is the impact here on investment in real estate?
So I think to slightly copy the answer I gave before, I think that technology generally is going to change the investment side of things. I think it will change how we value. I think it will change the things that make us value properties. And I think that, as was said earlier by Joe, I think the liquidity in the real estate sector is going to increase. Now, one of the reasons that real estate is so attractive is it's often counter to other more liquid assets. So if you want to invest in equities, then actually real estate creates a nice counter to that. So there is an opportunity to use technology to make it much more liquid and much more transparent. Blockchain is going to be a part of that, or might be a part of that solution, because it in particular attacks the trust issue. So at the moment, it takes a long time to register property, to transact, to make sure there's the authority. Regulation is a really important factor that comes up in investment and general economics. And all of that, blockchain can help from a transparency, having a trusted ledger of what's gone on. So I think that for me, it's going to support the process becoming more and more transparent going forward, and to become faster and more liquid. But it's probably going to be a part of a suite of technologies that help that, not just a standalone thing.
Yeah.
Thank you,
I
Dan.
think that
If I can just remind our listeners that we were very happy to take questions. You can submit them, and we will feed them to the panel. I'm conscious of time, that we're a little bit behind where we'd like to be. And I know a lot of people listening will be thinking about the impact, particularly on valuation. And so perhaps the panel could give us some insight into how you would see the changes that are being talked about, as at least potential changes from blockchain, on what is going to mean for people whose everyday job it is to provide valuations of property on which their clients depend. How is that going to be affected? Who wants to come in?
Yeah, I'll have a go at that to start off with. So So the role of the valuer at the moment is it depends what you mean what a valuation is. So there are two aspects to that. One is creating a number, and creating that number is going to become increasingly data-driven, more and more data points. And I think blockchain will be partially responsible for creating more data, but more importantly will be part of the solution of understanding where it's come from, can it be trusted, what's the quality, and are you allowed to use it? So I don't think that a valuer will directly be using blockchain for that, but I can see that blockchain could be part of the solution of understanding the integrity of data, which then feeds into the numbers. The second part of it is that the valuer often provides lots of advice to the client about what to do with it. So what are the mitigations, what are the risks, what are the opportunities, what can they do about it? And so whilst blockchain won't necessarily be part of that, understanding how to track the quality of the data and understand the different factors that feed into the valuation number is going to become increasingly important. It's already absolutely essential, but as we get more and more data points going into it, it's going to become more and more complex for people to understand. So there's going to be a really interesting aspect to how do we understand where the data points have come from and how we can understand those. And blockchain could be the solution to that. Over all of that, there is a regulation aspect. So regulation at the moment is done by single bodies who regulate, and there is an argument that the transactions for automated valuation models or anything else that happens will be something that could be done in a distributed fashion. So you're doing away with that single trusted body. That's a much more complex topic. And again, I think blockchain would be part of the solution rather than the overall single silver bullet.
If I can just add to that, actually, yes, I think this idea about how blockchain actually sometimes it's referred to as the trust protocol in terms of being able to have trust in the mechanism for consensus rather than trust in the intermediary. And this problem around data sharing is actually, people, there's more and more data, as Dan said, that's being generated about the context of buildings, through buildings themselves, through technologies such as the Internet of Things, more and more data points. And actually, at the moment, this whole data asset is quite fragmented, and people own or they operate different parts of that, but it never comes together. So there's a problem around how you view that asset holistically as a digital asset. And I do think that the blockchain has great potential in actually helping us to share that data, understand the data, and potentially put a value on that data. So, all the mechanisms to date around actually valuing a property are all to do with the physical assets. And I think blockchain shows great promise on the early stages of helping us to understand and value the digital asset.
What I think, I completely agree to you. I think blockchain itself will not change it. I think blockchain makes it possible that we are going to use buildings in a different way, more flexibility, and by having more flexibility, we can keep track on what is happening, and this information can be derived directly from how the building is being used. And that's the way how blockchain can help the way can affect the work of the appraiser, because he doesn't necessarily have to use his own databases anymore. He can derive information directly from the systems that are in the building. And by having blockchain, we have more different ways of using of the building. So hospitality, more customer engagement. This will be the effect for the real estate owner. And the appraiser needs to have insight and follow these developments. And just by being connected with a blockchain to what is happening in a building, he's still able to produce a value of the building. I think that's the way how it will affect his business.
Okay, so thank you, Joe. I want to jump now to some of the Q&A, because we're getting questions in, and I would love to hear the panel's views on the questions that people are submitting. I'm going to give you bring two together here, which are related to regulation. One is, what do you see as the regulatory challenge for using a blockchain in real estate transactions? And also, someone's asked a question about GDPR. Is that something which is going to be relevant in the development of blockchain?
Yes, 2 times yes. And I think that what are the experiences from the first results? The experiences are that there are still a lot of issues to be solved. And some of the issues are about how does it fit in a regulation? How does it fit within the GDPR rules? But not only the real estate people are trying to find a solution. Like Dan said before, there's a huge of money put into experimenting in investigating how blockchain can be applied, and these are one of the main questions that are going to be solved somehow. But we do not have the right answer right now.
No, I think if I can just jump in there, I think they're 2 very good questions. I think they're quite separate in many ways. So the regulation aspect in blockchain has the ability to help with that a lot because it brings a lot of transparency and it does the trust aspect. So theoretically it can help a lot, but it's very, very difficult for regulators because technology moves at such an incredible pace. It's very difficult to move a regulation at that pace. So theoretically as a technology, I think it could help regulators a lot. But I think at the same time, it's moving so quickly, it's going to create them a lot of different problems. And it's very difficult to introduce regulation that you then row back on or change after a short period of time, because regulation in this sort of space often takes a lot of time and effort to implement. So I think that it could be part of the solution, but it's also paradoxically going to cause a lot of problems from the speed point of view. Yeah. GDPR is slightly different. So the other thing about GDPR is that if the transaction, part of GDPR says that you need to be able to delete data going backwards, and that isn't something you can necessarily do within the blockchain. Now that doesn't necessarily mean you need to be capturing personal data on the blockchain, but it is something that is a problem that you can't necessarily delete. Therefore, it is something that people need to consider about what they put on there.
Yeah, I know that there are still some solutions that are GDPR proof, so the people they're working on it. But I wanted to add on the regulatory topic. The technology is a universal technology, but if you look, for example, in Europe, we have how many countries do we have? With each country having its own regulatory framework, and I think a universal technology fitting in all every single regulatory framework, that is something very difficult. So somehow we have to see how it fits and where it hits the borders or not. And this will make it difficult. But we have to find out.
Yeah, so it certainly would be a challenge for national regulators. It's sort of, if there's to be regulation, it needs to be cross-border, it would sound. Somebody's asked a question which is very different, and that is, do we see scope for blockchain and indeed Bitcoin to help us crowdfund for real estate projects? It is actually going to change the way in which we source funding. Any ideas on that?
Yeah. Maybe Linda then.
Yeah. So Bitcoin is a currency. There are other cryptocurrencies out there, and I think that if you're trying to raise funds for something, then the obvious way is to go out and ask for currency, and that could be dollars or pounds or Bitcoin. So it is another currency that's out there to help raise funds. There is another alternative, which is that you start creating tokens yourself that you then start selling. So it's what's known as an ICO, where you start creating things. There is a lot of skepticism and cynicism about ICOs. Some people have used it to raise enormous amounts of money, but there's an awful lot of, I think I read recently, up to 80% of ICOs can be scams or are thought to be scams in some shape or form. So whilst they're not necessarily a bad idea, there is a lot of skepticism and concern that goes with those. So blockchain can allow the ICOs to happen, and there's obviously the currency that people can raise as well.
Any other views on that?
Yeah, Linda.
Okay,
Well, No, I believe that it will bring new potential, a little bit like Dan says, but just by having the possibility to make money smart, you can make investment smart, and this enables many more things than we have today. Also to track investments, also to divide them, also to connect them with additional information belonging to a building. So I think there are huge potential by just using digital money for investments.
Okay, and I've got a question that's aimed very much at Linda. Someone's asking if you could just expand a bit on what you mean by the data of an asset. What are the types of data that you think are going to be absolutely part of any blockchain approach to real estate investment?
Yeah, so I guess when I talk about the digital asset, I'm meaning something quite holistic, I guess. The best way to describe it is, if you've got two identical buildings, physical buildings, and one of them all of the data about in terms of you've got the BIM model, you know how it's operating, you've got it's instrumented, and the other one you don't. Is this second building with the data asset worth more than the first? And the reaction I just get is, well, of course it is. And they ask, well, how much more is it worth? So I think what we're saying is that implicitly we know that data does add value, but we've just got no way of quantifying that, even as an uplift of the physical asset. So I guess that when I talk about the digital asset, I'm talking about it, in the round, in that holistic sense. And the digital asset can be built up of, all kinds of data about that building. But really what happens in the whole life cycle of the building is that we don't really take care of the digital asset right from the beginning. So in the beginning, it doesn't kind of live alongside the physical asset and there's clear ownership. The digital asset tends to get created at various points in the life cycle. So, for example, a BIM model might be created. Then, the building might be fitted out with kind of some IoT technology, and there's another data source. So you get all these kind of data sources and data streams that are pertinent to the building, but are quite fragmented across the life cycle. It's very unclear in terms of ownership and value and how you bring those together. So I think it is a broad area, and I think the data assets can be classified into many different kind of data types, including static and dynamic data types. But I just think that it's a really interesting area in terms about, where every industry is being reduced to data, and data is getting more and more important in terms of our knowledge of what happens in the building or how we could use a building, that it's something that we really ought to start thinking about in a holistic way.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Another question that somebody's raised, and he says it's a rather technical question, is this issue of scalability. So the assertion here is that with the Ethereum blockchain, it's only possible to process one transaction at a time, whereas, of course, across real estate, there are millions of global transactions going on throughout the year in many different directions, many different dimensions to those. Is blockchain really up to the job, if you like, of being scaled up to become a real, a really core piece of real estate investments and transactions?
I think you have to face the technical difficulties, and then you have to design a solution that can work. I think I'm involved for myself in what we call a property management 3.0 solution. And there we also had the question, how can we scale this? And we looked at it and we thought, okay, the solution must not be that we build, how I'm going to explain, to build the blockchain solution just for the entire portfolio of a real estate manager, but we build it on the scale of a building. And every new building will have its new blockchain source. So the size of the building then is the maximum size of the scalability. And I think there are some concerns, there are some problems, there are some issues, that's the word. But by knowing that the scalability can be a problem and taking account of that, it's also possible to find the solution. And I'm sure that it's possible to find solutions. It's a way of designing the solution, designing your blockchain product.
Anyone else want to come in on that one? Somebody's made a comment online that building data could become an additional source of income for buildings, and therefore perhaps a value add. I wonder, have any of the panel actually seen any examples of where the building data really has been a source of additional income, or are you seeing examples of where people are perhaps experimenting with that?
Yeah, I think there are probably two different angles to that. So blockchain may well be part of the solution, but I think this is a much bigger thing about the data model itself for the building. And I guess one of the best examples is around BIM. So there is a lot of anecdotal evidence. There is not a huge amount of well-proven evidence from multiple case studies that BIM data saves significant costs at the construction stage, but also throughout the overall life cycle and the operational costs. So there's a huge amount of value, in inverted commas, that comes from the data through reduction of costs. And there's also a huge amount of evidence to suggest that you can run a building much better, which should logically feed into better rents and shorter vacancy periods. So data in that sense absolutely has a value. I think this question is going a step further and saying, can you then take that data and sell it? And I think that increasingly data will be part of the data model for a building will increasingly be part of the valuation of a property itself. And I think over time you will be able to sell data to be able to look at performance of the buildings. At a very crudest level, you can look at things like BCIS in the UK, which looks at mass data and looks at how you can benefit from taking that and aggregating it up. If you look at IPD indices, they take aggregated data. So there is some starting points for data being of value and people taking data from buildings, aggregating it up and then using it for something. I think there's an awful long way to go, and I think it's going to be a huge area of growth in the future.
Yeah, and I heard an example myself of Transport for London making their data widely available to others for free. Perhaps they could do it commercially, but making it available for others for free to make use of, but ultimately to benefit TfL, because it meant that perhaps potential passengers were able to make better choices about their use of transport if the system was clogged or whatever. So there can be value created from data even when you give it away for free in terms of mitigating perhaps risks and so on.
Definitely, and it brings up a whole open data. There's a lot of, in the UK is a great example of the Land Registry, who I think Joe said earlier, you can use blockchain from a complete replacement because you can have the authority figure. But in the UK, Land Registry have been doing some great test and R&D work to look at how they can make the efficiency of their processes much better through using blockchain as a part of the overall solution.
Okay, I think I've got time for one more question. I'm going to put this to everyone on the panel. I think it's quite an important one to aid understanding. We've talked a lot about taking away central authority by having, if you like, distributed authority and the potential benefits of that. But with that comes presumably distributed inputting of data. So, how do you know that with a distributed sources of data, how do we know that the data that's going in the first place is as reliable and secure as it might be if we had a more centralized approach?
I think it's something that we're still wrestling with at the moment, if I'm honest. In terms of, I guess in my career, I've lived through kind of the mythical data model, if you like, and there always used to be this idea in organisations many years ago that you could kind of put this data model together and all the data would conform. And I think with the explosion of data, we know that that's pretty unrealistic. And again, the idea that it's not just the information in your organisation. Everyone else now needs everyone else's data, and it's as simple as that. And especially around the concept of a smart city and how that data interacts. I think there's some interesting work being done by an organisation called Ocean Protocol. And Ocean Protocol actually aims to be a protocol for data sharing. And they want to, they're realising that there's a problem in terms of how people actually have access to data. And that actually, many of the big tech companies have both AI and machine learning knowledge plus the data. And actually, there is a bit of a disadvantage to everyone else because they don't necessarily have access to that much data, even though they're gaining in knowledge and techniques. So they're kind of using Ocean Protocol as a way of saying, how do we incentivize people to share data, and how do we use blockchain to incentivize, but also to kind of weed out the bad actors, if you like. So reward the kind of the good data, and to reward that data sharing kind of practice. So I think it's quite an emerging space. But even then, with a protocol, the idea is that you're trying to make everything as open as possible because you want that very wide contribution. But then again, it's, how do I curate some of that information? So again, the way that they're looking at it is perhaps you would have more kind of industry marketplaces for data, and you would have these kind of trust frameworks between the actors and the organisations in there. So I think it's a very relevant question in terms of this idea of how do you open up everything so that we have this kind of complete knowledge and access, and we're gaining data from all the sources versus this kind of curated version of it. And again, can you ever really get away from a trusted intermediary? Because perhaps you do need a trusted intermediary that even kind of goes near creating, curating that data or creating the safe space for it.
Thank you. Does anyone very quickly want to come in on that point before we have to wrap up?
I think, first of all, I think blockchain will not have all the data that go around in the blockchain. I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings. Blockchain will have only the data that are necessary for trust. I explained about the hash. Maybe we send much more data beside the blockchain than in the blockchain. But we use the blockchain to make a track record and to build trust. And I think what is going to change, we put a glass basket on a problem that we have today, but on the borders of the glass basket, the question of trusting the data. If the input is bad, then the output will also be bad. So we will just move the problem to a different situation. And somehow in the future, when we have more data, there will also be a track record. People that put in too often bad data, they will have a bad reputation at the end. And people that are trustful, they will have a good reputation, and their data will be trusted more. So something like that will be where it goes to.
Okay, thank you, Joe. And on that note, I think it probably is time for us to wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. You can find out more from the World Built Environment Forum Summit website, which is www.rcs.org/WBEF. Thank you to our speakers, Dan Hughes and Linda Chandler of Liquid Real Estate Innovation, and also to Joe Bronkers of Fibri. I think it's been a fascinating discussion. We had more questions than we could answer, but we're going to gather up the questions that we were unable to cover today, and we'll be very interested in putting those questions into a future session. So do let us have your feedback. If you found this session useful and interesting, if you'd like us to do more, and you have ideas for topics we should be discussing, we would very much welcome them. So thank you, everyone, today, and with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you.